What is going on, guys? Welcome back to The Shelf, and here we are. Man, it's been a long road. Conjuring films are finally over. I cannot believe that this whole era, this saga, has come to an end finally. Yeah, looks like we're in it for the long haul, guys. So, against my better judgment, I went and saw The Conjuring 4. Don't really know why. I more or less went and hate-watched this thing. I had a feeling that I wouldn't really like it. And you could say that, before we even get into this review, I guess you would call it, that I went in wanting to hate this movie, right? And I'm self-aware enough to admit that that may be the case, but there's a reason for that, and it's because I'm going in based off of the last handful of Conjuring offerings, specifically the films of Michael Chavez, who has done The Devil Made Me Do It. He did a couple of the Nun films or something. And, with all respect to Michael Chavez, the guy doesn't have much juice. He doesn't have the sauce, as we call it. He's no James Wan, to put it bluntly. But I still went because I wanted to make up my own opinion about the thing. I wanted to be able to comment on the film in a way that was organic and true to me, and not just going in based off of what I've heard other people say. So, with all that being said, this movie offended me in quite a few ways, and we're gonna get into it here. Now, I realize this is by no direct fault of the film itself, but if these Conjuring movies are good for anything, it is for consistently having the worst crowds that you could possibly imagine in a movie theater. I waited a week to go see this thing. I might have even waited 2 weeks. I'm not even sure exactly when this came out, but I waited a while because I didn't want to get caught up in the teenagers throwing popcorn, on a Friday night. Their parents drop them off outside of the movie theater with $20. It's probably more like 40 now. It was 20 when I was a kid. 20 now probably wouldn't cover it. But, regardless, my crowd for this film was awful. Extremely disrespectful, just would not shut up, stomping their feet and shaking the seats, during every scary scene. And, that's more or less what these movies are for. That's who they are marketed for. These are, at the risk of sounding pretentious and gatekeeping horror, these are horror films for, the general audiences, for the masses. These are the people who, aren't really discerning quality in horror films. To these people, all horror films are the same, and it's movies like this that are the reason for that. And then you have people like me and maybe people like you watching who watch all sorts of horror films, and they're able to make judgments based on the quality of them and how they make you feel days and weeks after the fact, after you see them. And I'm really not trying to be, sounding like I'm better than anybody, but, I don't think it's kind of inarguable that there are different levels when it comes to horror films, right? And the Conjuring films are more of like the Avengers movies, where they're made to appeal to as many people as possible, and, and that's great, and they make a lot of money, and it's good for the box office, which is great. I'm all for that. Anything that makes the box office healthy, I'm behind it. Anything that's good for the horror genre as a whole. Maybe somebody will go see a Conjuring film, and then they'll go out and seek out more horror films that might be of a higher quality. That's great too. So I'm really not trying to poo-poo the Conjuring movies too much. I really do like the first two. James Wan, is a big reason behind that. Ever since then, the quality has tanked. I don't think that's a super hot take. I think that's, generally the consensus with this franchise, right? So yeah, no. All that being said, just as a sort of, introductory statement to what I'm about to talk about here. So I do want to give this movie its flowers a little bit here, because there are actually some moments in the film that are actually pretty effective. There's a couple scares early on in the film that I really thought were executed pretty well. But by the way, folks, this will be a spoiler review, so I'm going to get into the movie. I'm going to talk about as much as I deem relevant here. So if you haven't seen The Conjuring 4 yet, definitely go watch it and then, come back to this video if you feel so inclined. But anyway, the first scare that I thought was actually really effective was the one in the basement where the mom is doing the laundry. And she's looking off into the darkness, and you can just make out the silhouette of a person. And while this is not an extremely original scare, it's executed well because they have the restraint to not, you know, blast you with, you know, really loud, obnoxious sound effects that, you know, ultimately diminish the overall effect of just the subtlety of that person in the background. And then when she flicks the light on, and it's like a picture of John Wayne or something, and it's like, you know, that thing that our brains do when we see dark images in, you know, in the dark, and our brains will liken them to things that we understand. So that's why, you know, when you're in your bed at night and you're looking around your room and it's dark and you see the silhouette of your computer chair and it looks like a person, right? But, you know, that's just the things that our brains do. So I think it's a really effective scare in that regard. And, you know, I wanted more of that, if anything. So the other scare that I really liked was the one where the teenage girl, the daughter of the Smurl family, is trying to rewind on the VHS player, and she's trying to pause it at the perfect moment, which is like, if you're old enough to remember using a VHS player or a VCR, that's a relatable thing. In that comes this built-in tension, because you know that as soon as she does pause it correctly, you know, there's going to be some sort of scary payoff. And it's executed so well because, you know, there's the repetition behind it, right? So it becomes a ticking clock, and you know eventually she's going to get it. And, you know, and she does. And, you know, you have the whole analog sort of lo-fi horror that comes from the VHS, you know, component of the 80s. So I thought that was all really well done, and I was actually pretty impressed by that whole sequence. So I guess to get into a little bit of the story here, you know, it's Ed and Lorraine Warren. They're a little older now. It's in the 80s, you know, and they're coming to the end of their career. And, you know, as established in the last film, Ed has these like heart problems, right? And, you know, that's kind of carried through a little bit here, and they touch on it here and there. And, you know, one sequence that I found particularly amusing was, you know, Ed is playing a game of ping pong with Tony, who is his daughter's fiance. And it's this fun sequence, you know, they're really going tit for tat. Everyone's watching. It's a great, you know, volley. And at the end of it, you know, he wins, but he's like, starts kind of bugging out a little bit, like his heart was doing too much. And in that moment, I was like, bro, the ping pong game is about to take you out? Like, you're not cut out for this demon life anymore, bro. Like, if the ping pong is an issue, it's time to pack it up, dude. Like, you're unk at this point. Like, you cannot hang. You need to stop, you know. And I just thought that was a little silly that, you know, I'm expected to believe that ping pong is pushing it for him, but now he's going to go and fight some demons with his wife. So, you know, a little bit inconsistent there, but, you know, whatever. So this is going to be a little bit all over the place, but now I just want to get into some of the gripes that I had with the logic issues of The Conjuring. And this is a problem with all of these movies, but I'm specifically going to talk about the things that happen in this movie. And so there is this priest character who was introduced in past films. I can't remember his name, but, you know, he is sort of the catalyst for getting the Warrens to come out of retirement and help the Smurl family. But in doing so, he kind of has to die for them to finally start to take this situation seriously. And the way in which he dies is very confusing to me, and I'll explain why. So he goes to this, you know, this building, right? It's this office building. It might even be a church. I can't remember. He's seeking, you know, an audience with somebody. And there's this like secretary there, and they're talking, and he's like, I'll wait, you know, I'll wait for, you know, so that I can go talk to them. And then he like looks up at something, and then he looks back, and the secretary is gone now. At which point, immediately, I'm like, all right, wait, so what is actually happening here? Because what goes on to happen is this priest is sitting in this room. Now that the secretary is gone, the room becomes very dark. The doors burst open, and like this black billowing cloud, this demonic entity fills the room. And so at this point, I'm wondering to myself, and you know, perhaps I'm overthinking this, but in my opinion, if a horror film doesn't have clearly identifiable rules and stakes, and you kind of just do whatever you want because it looks cool, or it's cinematic, or it's scary, or whatever, I personally cannot get invested in films like that, because I'm spending my time wondering, at what point is reality no longer reality? So, at what point, like, did this priest actually walk into this room, and was there actually a secretary there? Or, Like, at what point does it become not real? Because then, you know, he has this whole experience, you know, the demon eventually convinces him to 86 himself, and then he goes and he does it, and he, you know, wraps this vacuum cord around his neck, and so at some point something happens that makes him do this. So it's like, was the lady just not there? You know, because, and if so, it's just not very well communicated to me as an audience member. And perhaps I'm overthinking this, and, you know, please feel free to let me know in the comments if I'm, you know, dumb and miss something. But and it happens later on in the film as well. So at this point, the film is establishing, to me at least, that these demons, the way that they really get you is by convincing you to 86 yourself. Because they themselves cannot actually harm you, right? That's what this scene is conveying to me. So let's keep that in mind, because it's going to be relevant later on. And it makes sense with Lorraine Warren, because she has these clairvoyant visions where, you know, she'll be in a totally ordinary seeming situation, and then something will happen where, you know, everything is not quite what it seems, and these ghosts will manifest in different ways. But for the priest to have it happen to him, it doesn't really make sense, because he's not clairvoyant. He doesn't have those visions. So the film takes a little bit of liberty with, you know, oh, well, we can use this same sort of cinematic language across the board, right? It doesn't have to be specific to Lorraine, even though logistically it makes sense with her. And so, you know, anyway, I digress for now. I'll also just mention that, you know, it takes an hour and a half before the Warrens even arrive at the haunted house. So I understand that they're kind of building it up. They have these two sort of parallel storylines running concurrently until they kind of converge. But, you know, this film is ultimately, it's just way too long. The pacing is not great, because once they get to the house, it feels like a sprint, like a sprint to the finish line. And, you know, it just kind of feels a little sloppy from that perspective. But hey, this is the final outing, you know, supposedly. So they really went all out. You know, they got this haunted mirror, the garbage disposal's haunted, everything's haunted in this movie. You know, fucking everything. The ping pong table's fucking haunted. I don't know. It almost killed Ed. So speaking of the mirror, right? They established that there's this mirror that the Warrens made contact with early on in their career. And now they've come full circle, and the Smurl family now has the mirror. Except the Smurl girls, the daughters, take the mirror out and they throw it in the trash, and it gets, you know, we watch it get like crushed up, right? Which is odd, but it's like whatever, because we know eventually, like, the mirror shows back up, and it shows up in the attic. And I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. Demon logic. But then the Warrens establish that they're going to take it back to their house and keep it with all of their other haunted items. And, you know, to that point, I would say, you know, why would it be any different bringing it back to their house if, you know, they established that it's just going to go back to the Smurls? And I would answer that just by, you know, myself, right? My thinking would be that it's because, you know, once the demons have been vanquished or whatever, you know, then you can just do whatever you want with this mirror. And if that's the case, why even take the mirror at all if it's no longer a threat? So the whole it's all just very muddled. It's very unclear. It's very messy. And that's sort of the theme with this movie in particular. And in addition to being messy, the movie just has these very arbitrary rules that I was talking about. So, for example, in the finale of the film, there's this whole sequence where Lorraine is in the basement and she's being chased by this axe-wielding demon/ghost thing. And the whole time this is happening, right? She's like dodging swings of this axe from this demon. In my mind, I'm thinking, what happens if she gets hit by this axe? Like, does anything even actually happen? Like, this ghost is not actually there, right? They can't actually harm you physically. They have to, like, convince you to hang, or, you know, I have to speak carefully with YouTube, but, you know, they convince you to, like, 86 yourself. So the whole time that, you know, I'm supposed to be invested in Lorraine not getting hit by this axe, all I'm thinking about is, fuck it, let it happen. What's going to happen? It's not going to actually hurt her, because this movie has established that that's not really how these ghosts operate. And, you know, it's all just, you know, like I said already, it's very poorly communicated. What exactly are the stakes here? Because the whole movie, I'm also thinking, like, I know Ed Warren is not in danger. I know Lorraine's not in danger. I know Judy's not in danger. Hell, I even know that Tony, the fiance, I know he's not in any danger. And none of the Smurls are even in any danger. The only guy who's in danger in this whole movie is the fucking priest from the other movies that nobody gives a shit about. So it's like, what do I care about here? What are the stakes? There are none. Zero. This is the last Conjuring film, supposedly. And there is nothing at all to be invested in, whatsoever. At least for me. As far as like the danger component, which, you know, you would expect there to be some danger in a horror film, right? You get none of that here. So yeah, just very frustrating, very, you know, there's no investment for me whatsoever during the runtime of this movie. The only thing I was invested in was when it was going to be over. Then the thing that I found the most stupid was just the end of the film where there's the wedding with Judy and Tony. And, you know, you have all these cameos from the past 3 Conjuring films. And the only thing I was thinking to myself was, if these guys have had thousands of cases, which is not me being hyperbolic, they've literally said they had thousands of cases, why are the only people who got invited the people from the first 3 movies? Like, I was just, you know, and not to mention, Judy would not even know these people. Like, she would have been like 8 years old during the time of the first Conjuring movie, so it's like, why the fuck would she invite Lily Taylor to her wedding? Like, it's nothing but just kind of stupid fan service that actually doesn't make sense within the context of the movie. So it doesn't make sense in the context of the movie, and it doesn't make sense in general. And then the thing that offends me the very most about this movie is the way that, you know, after the credits have rolled, right, and it's showing you all this archival footage of the Warrens on their, you know, investigations, right? And I can't remember exactly what it says, but there's this text that is on the screen now, and it says, you know, something to the effect of, the Warrens, while controversial, pioneered interest in the field of paranormal research during a time when it might have, you know, solicited ridicule from others. And, you know, that message is, it bothered the shit out of me. And I'll tell you why. Because it's okay for a movie to play up and overly exaggerate a true story, right? And I'm fine with that. That doesn't bother me. But when you take these people who were very real and are confirmed fraudsters and grifters, right? They actually did not do any real paranormal research. You know, they might have been involved in very loose capacities with some of these famous cases, right? But it's like, just the implication of that sentence of, they did it at a time when it would have elicited ridicule. As if that's any different now, when, like, the real-life equivalent of the Warrens today is literally Zach Bagans.
Stop it! Stop. Stop. Wait till I ask a question. Are you evil? 1's for yes, 2 for no.
Like, I'm not even being funny when I say that. Like, that's literally the case. So it's like, to take these people who are just these grifters and try to, like, you know, establish them and, like, send them off in this blaze of glory like they were these really great people who, like, helped a lot of people is just, like, offensive to my intelligence at best and disingenuous at worst. Like, it's actually pretty irresponsible of the filmmakers, I think. Like, they felt like they had to kind of make these people out to be something that they are proven to not be just because they're the core of their franchise. It just really rubbed me the wrong way, and I found it, like, actually offensive that, you know, because people are going to read that and be like, yeah, for sure. No, that's how it happened. That's real. Like, because like I said, these movies are for general audiences, and I'm not saying that everybody's a dum-dum and can't Google things for themselves, but there are people who are going to come away from that and be like, damn, the Warrens really were about that shit. They were really about that life. And it's like, no, dude, they were not. And these movies, while obviously dramatizations and not meant to be taken literally, like, obviously none of this shit actually happened, but it's just very odd to me, and it's a weird choice, and yeah, I just did not like that at all. That was like for that to be right at the end, because we're now at an omniscient point of view, right? This is not happening within the context of the film, in the plot. This is now, the filmmakers have put this message here to be like, yeah, you know, these people were controversial, but, you know, they were pioneers in the field of paranormal research. That's not a field, brother. That is not a respected scientific field of study. It wasn't then, and it's definitely not now. why are you trying to play it out like that's not the case? It's just very bizarre to me. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up there because I've kind of gotten this all out of my system now, and I don't have to think about this movie anymore. So anyway, guys, that is my thoughts on The Conjuring 4, Last Rites. It's not The Last Rites. It's not even close to The Last Rites, unfortunately. But, you know, I like to see the big horror films. Sometimes when I'm compelled to talk about them, I'll do so here. So let me know if you agree with any of the things that I talked about in this video. You know, comment down below. Let's get a discussion going. And, you know, like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't. We talk about new movies, old movies, physical media, and horror in general. So with all that being said, guys, please take care and watch more movies.